Welcome to another episode of the Unblock Your BS podcast, y'all. Thank you so much for so many of you who have reached out in the DMs and made comments and reviews on just how much you're loving it so far. As this new adventure of sharing this on a platform like podcasting and blogging, it gets a little bit intimidating of like, is this going to land with anybody? So it matters. Thank you for the reviews, for the comments, and the feedback. I will take all the feedback you've got. I can handle it. So even if you have some constructive feedback, love to hear it. You can hit me up in the DMs on TikTok if you want, or in the comments section of any of the posts. So today we're going to dive into ending a marriage. Whoo! I said it. We're going to dive into it. If you're contemplating it, even if you've gone through the divorce process, this may resonate with you, but especially if you are on the brink of ending a long-term relationship or getting a divorce, even if you have children, because I had small children at the time that I asked for the divorce, we're gonna peel back the layers of what that looks like, kind of give you a behind the scenes of the experience that I went through, and also what you may be experiencing and how to navigate the emotional journey of considering divorce. So I know it's a difficult crossroads that I would say, I mean, definitely most marriages end in divorce these days, right? I think the last statistic I wrote was 52% of marriages end in divorce. And that's just the ones that actually follow through with the divorce, not the ones that are still miserable and unhappy, but are together for religious reasons or the children, right? And I think one of the stats that I read recently was that like 80% of marriages are not happy. And so while I don't believe that necessarily happiness is the goal of marriage, I do think contentment is at least the baseline of what it should be. And so here we have a construct that doesn't seem to be working. And I have some takes on why I think that is, at least with kind of the modern world that we've gone into, and especially after, the Me Too movement and women empowerment and women equal pay, and how women have so many more opportunities than we did 50 years ago, right? I love it when I get comments of like, well, marriage worked for the grandparents and like, back in the day, marriages, we destroyed marriage as a society. And I'm like, maybe. And I tend to look at the perspective of women couldn't leave a bad situation before like the 1970s. We couldn't even get a bank account until the 1970s. So where were we going to go? How were we going to live? How were we going to like sign a lease on an apartment and take care of our children when we couldn't even get a job that would even pay us? Right. So to some extent, there is some benefit to women being able to have choices. But I do think, and this is just my personal take, that with women having so many more opportunities now to financially provide for themselves, we don't have to tolerate as much maltreatment as maybe our ancestors and our grandmothers and great grandmothers had to. That's not to say that that's every relationship, but to credit or give some grace to men, y'all, societally speaking, I'm going to generalize this, weren't really taught how to meet a woman emotionally or even understand your emotions or have an emotional conversation or talk about those things that women are now almost requiring way more than they ever have before. Because look, if I can go out and be in the workforce and I then have to carry the load of being, taking care of the children and being the primary person who runs the household, because still statistically women are doing that and biologically we still tend to do that. So now I'm having to do all of these jobs, and the man, generally speaking, again, I know I am generalizing, and that doesn't apply to every one of you men listening. Generally speaking, men are still just in the provider roles and not necessarily helping out, taking care of the household and the children, and also being an emotional support for the woman. We're kind of like, why do we have to carry you along this journey too? Why do we have to do the emotional labor as well, when maybe life would be easier if we didn't have to have that on our plates as well? And so I think we just have a generation of women who are just exhausted, overworked, right? There is no rest. You want a beautifully feminine woman who's just like wants to jump your bones all the time, men? She's got to fucking rest. She's tired. And then, yeah, it doesn't feel good when you come home. I think one of the things that's been a really interesting question that I've been asking a lot of men is like, what is it you want it to feel like when you come home? And they all want to feel loved and appreciated and respected when they come in. And women can do that. And how are you showing up at home, men? Are you coming home as a tyrant and like, irritated and you've been in traffic or work was tough and you're just projecting all of that and you're coming in as an angsty, angry monster. Well, now all of a sudden we're responsible for your emotional state when you come home and changing that. It's not how it works, right? And again, women are not also or also not to blame in how marriages dissolve either. And that took me, I would say, a good year after initiating the divorce and kind of getting through the ick of the divorce to really recognize what was my part in that, because I did blame my ex for a lot of things. That's why I left. And he had a lot of responsibility of how he wasn't being a partner to me and some other things that we won't necessarily get into. But I also allowed for that to happen. I allowed myself to be treated that way. I did not know how to set boundaries in my marriage. I was not self aware in my marriage. I led with empathy and people pleasing, and I became something that he could just walk all over and push all over. And to some extent, I can look back now and see where I had the best of intentions, right? I didn't know what made a marriage work at that time. I just knew I was in a marriage that wasn't working. And so I was in therapy. I was trying to get him to go to therapy. He didn't want to go to therapy because he thought we both, I don't know. It was just like a whole mess, right? And when we did finally go to couples counseling, we kind of followed the Gottman method, right? And if you haven't heard of the Gottman method or worked with a Gottman counselor, or read, what is it, The Seven Keys to Marriage or something like that, John Gottman and the Gottman Institute is really fascinating because they have studied relationships and marriages, and they have these key indicators of what is like the leading cause of divorce in the leading cause of divorce in marriages. And there were certain ones in there. I can't, it's like the three horsemen of the apocalypse or something like that. I should have refreshed before I did this episode. But I remember thinking, oh, we've got like 2 out of 3 of those going in our marriage. One was like contempt. There's like stonewalling. There's quite a few. It's fascinating to read. And I highly recommend it because it also gives you ways to kind of work through those things or avoid those in a relationship. But those were the clear indicators that a relationship was heading with divorce, and they could predict divorce, I think 90 some odd percent of the time. So there's patterns. And that's something that I've gotten really good at, is recognizing patterns of behavior and also kind of learning that in relationships as well. And so if you're contemplating divorce, I want to acknowledge that you're not taking this decision lightly. I don't think anybody does. Nobody goes into marriage thinking they're going to get divorced, right? And happy marriages don't end. But I think at almost every marriage I've heard of, there is a point in time where you kind of are contemplating, do we continue on with this? And I come from the belief, even having been divorced and worked with so many people who have gone, I mean, I've walked dozens of people through divorce. And I don't say that as like a proud thing because I'm not in charge of their choices, but I know what it takes, or the point somebody gets to get through a divorce and the support they need. I do believe that every relationship is salvageable if you have 2 willing participants to say, fuck it, what we had is dead, done, and over with. We're going to create something new, and that's going to be uncomfortable for both of us because we both have to look at how we contributed to it getting to the point that we're at. And even when there's infidelity and there's betrayal and there's mistrust and there's all of these different, called the horsemen of the apocalypse, whatever the Gottmans wanted to call it. When you have 2 people who are willing to put their ego aside and their need to be right aside and really prioritize that we want to be together, we don't want to go through a divorce, we don't want to break up this family, then we need to risk vulnerability. We need to risk putting our heart out there and us both figuring this out, likely with a third-party counselor to help us figure out the tools to do this, because how we managed it without tools got us to this point. So we've got to learn a new way to do things. That then can be the basis of repairing, not even repairing, building something new. You can't just like try to get something that was broken and just try to tape it together. You've got to almost like burn it down and start something new. But what I find in most of the scenarios, at least by the time a client reaches out to me, is that one partner is done, the other one is oblivious, or the other one thinks everything's fine, or the other one is just unwilling to do that work of being vulnerable, of getting raw, of building something new together and creating that hope again that can keep a relationship moving forward and even become something better than it was before. And when you don't have 2 people, then you have a one-sided relationship and it can't work that way. you'll burn each other out. You'll get so fed up with each other. You'll build resentment. Like it won't happen. And so let's talk about what the common feelings as you're contemplating divorce, right? And so I'm talking to those of you that have initiated a divorce or are considering initiating it. If you are on the receiving end of that conversation and you did not initiate divorce, it might be interesting for you to understand the other person's side of it on your own healing journey, to have some empathy and compassion. And I know that can be a very tough thing to do when you've been hurt by the person that you love and like promised to spend your life with. And maybe that's also part of what contributed to marriage, is that there was a lack of understanding the other person's experience of you. And so this can be really healing for somebody who was on the receiving end of it, to try to understand what caused their partner to get to that point to ask for the divorce. And I'm not saying there is a right party or a wrong party. Generally speaking, though, you can usually tell the person who was unwilling to do the work to save the marriage because they were the ones that played the victim in it all. And I want to get away from this victim blaming, victim shaming mentality that comes up anytime I bring up the word victim, because I come from the ilk of you take 100% of responsibility 100% of the time for 100% of the results in your life. That's the only way to start to heal and to get empowerment back and agency over your life and your choices. You made a series of choices in your life that ended up in the results. That doesn't mean that you're to blame. There's a difference between taking responsibility and blame or fault, right? So where people get really kind of angsty with me is if they were cheated on. I was not responsible for him cheating on me, right? Like I was not to blame for it. I'm not at fault for it. You weren't to blame for the choice for them to go cheat. However, you did contribute to a relationship that cheating was on the table on their end, right? So either you started to date someone who had that propensity to them, or you enabled a relationship where you guys weren't communicating all that well, or needs weren't getting met, or there wasn't safety in there. I'm not saying that you're at to blame for their choices. They are fully responsible for their choices. However, you were not uh without some sort of contribution to a relationship that wasn't healthy to stay monogamous. And so there's a lot of different ways we do that. And if you're triggered, please DM me and let's chat about it. I would love to hear your story and walk through it. But that's really when I started taking radical responsibility for my life. The ick, right? I wanted to blame my ex for everything. I blamed my ex for a lot of stuff. It's actually what helped me get out of the relationship. But in hindsight, I even went all the way back to when we were dating. That's how far back I went, to where did my choices head me down a path to get to a result I didn't want, right? Where did I have maybe instincts, red flags, like kind of gut emotions coming up, like little signs and signals that I ignored or self abandoned along the way? And my marriage was not any one specific event that ended it. It was almost like death by 1,000 needle points. Okay. And it had been years and years and years, and so many situations and occurrences and issues and challenges and choices that were made by both of us that got us to the point where we're at. There was not just one specific event. And so I can look back to those small, little, seemingly innocuous choices that I made that I didn't know were setting up patterns of choices along the way where I would self-abandon and start enabling. Where that one time he said something and slighted me, that I didn't call that out and say, please don't talk to me that way, or we're not going to talk to each other, or why are you saying that to me? Because that actually sounded really hurtful. I brushed it under the rug. I justified it of like, wow, he must be really hurting, or he didn't really mean that, or whatever, right? It was like little allowances that you just kind of want to brush off. And then all of a sudden they start to become more, they start to become patterns. Then you start to get used to it and you start to like not recognize how bad it's getting until you're in a therapist's office explaining like what your marriage is like. And you can just see the look of horror over her face. So I can understand that there is guilt that comes along with the thought of divorce. That was really, guilt and shame was the first thing that I had to work through to understand how I was going to get out of a marriage, because I didn't really want to get out of the marriage. But the first time I started considering divorce, I had thoughts of, I don't want to be a divorcee. That means I failed a marriage. What will society think? Do I want to get back out into the dating world? Like I desire partnership, but this ain't it. Sadness, fear. What was that going to look like for my children? My children were going to grow up in like a split home, and like what all of the stigma was. I was more worried about society's take on me getting a divorce than I was worried about my own experience of the marriage. And it took some time for me to sit with that concept and those beliefs. And this is really where I started to challenge my BS, my belief systems of like, huh, there's this pressure I feel from the imaginary made up society. I don't know, like I didn't have family in mind and I didn't have a religious background where it was like religious shame, although there's very much that in considering divorce as well for a lot of people. But I was worried about like being labeled a divorcee, right? Or being labeled as somebody who was divorced and like, ick, and like had a scarlet letter walking around on me. And I started to go, well, okay. There's not like one person in particular I'm worried about what they think because then I can like assess my relationship and how effective it is for me to continue to have a relationship that keeps me stuck in this situation. But it was more so I have a belief that divorce is bad, right? Just right off the bat, divorce is bad. And I was like, okay, where did that come from? Because my parents have been married for 40 some odd years. Like, as far as I know, they never contemplated divorce, although I'm sure they did. I just wasn't aware of it as a child. And I only knew of maybe one or two people in my world that had never been divorced. Everybody else was either single or had never been married or was married. So I didn't really have a good gauge of where this belief came from other than just kind of like the societal narrative of like marriage is forever and your vows and da da da, all this stuff. And I was like, okay, well, if I signed up for marriage being forever and for life, did I know what I was signing up for? Like, this is where my analytical, logical, business minded brain went in. I was like, did I know what I was agreeing to? I was like, I thought I was agreeing to marriage and partnership and for better or worse, sickness and health, um, to have and to hold, to love and to cherish all the typical vows. That's what I thought I was signing up for. And I find it interesting in the TikTok comment section when I start to bring up this topic of divorce, the number one way that angry, angsty men want to shame me, and I don't know why it's men, but it is, maybe because I'm a woman out there speaking my truth, uh, is you took vows. Yes, I sure did, sir. Stranger on the internet. And they said, you took vows for better, for worse. And you left him. You didn't honor your vows. And I was like, well, skirt. Hold on here, buddy. I understand contractual law pretty well. I own a couple businesses. Like I get contracts. There's a whole first half of the contract that was not being honored by the other party as well, which is to have and hold, to love, and to cherish. So if you're going to come at me shaming me for the second half, not upholding the second half of the contract, that's not how contracts work, buddy. You either honor the contract in whole or you don't honor it at all. So besides that kind of snarky approach to it, I really looked at what is it I define marriage as that divorce is so bad? And is that what I have? And this is where you can really start to manipulate the situation for you to feel however you want to feel, right? Now, I could have let the shame of divorce keep me in a situation where I was being destroyed. Like I don't want to get into specific details because I know there's another party involved in this, but I was not myself. I was losing myself rapidly. I was gaining weight at an alarming rate because I was using food as a comfort. I was stressed beyond belief. It felt like I had a third child. There were so many aspects to my life for so long that had been awful, straight up awful. And I don't even think I realized how awful they were in the moment. And that I kept staying in that because of this contract I signed, because I wanted to honor this concept of marriage and that everybody goes through a rough time. And maybe we'll get, maybe this is just where we have to get through this season to get to the other side of it. But over time and years, it wasn't getting any better. In fact, it was getting worse. And we had started having more bad years and times than we had good. And so I'm like, okay, in 10 years, is this going to get any better? Well, not the way we're handling it now. Okay, what is that going to do for me and for him and for our children if we keep going this way and we don't change something? Now, in hindsight, now having worked with many couples and walked through many divorces and even the processing of my own divorce, I, again, think that there's a way to salvage every relationship and get it to a thriving state, but it has to be letting go of the ego and letting go of all of this hurt and coming together and healing and building something new. I didn't have the tools, the knowledge, and the wherewithal and the support to be able to do that then. And at the point when I started considering divorce, you're just looking for oxygen at that point, right? Like you're drowning. And I think both he and I were drowning emotionally and mentally. We had very young kids, so I know that adds to it. And we were dealing with some mental health stuff going on his end as well. And it's just like, at what point I'm just like done surviving? If I'm going to have a chance at thriving, I can't keep going down this path. And I do remember a very specific moment. I mean, we tried almost everything that we could think of. I mean, everything I could think of. I gave up a business to spend more time with him and allow him to go work because he wasn't working at the time, and we wanted to switch the dynamic in our relationship. I Gosh, I was in therapy. We were in therapy. We moved across the country to have a better cost of living, like during the pandemic. Like we genuinely tried. And I think that was our saving grace why we lasted so long, is because there was always effort being made to try something new until we got to a point. And I remember sitting in therapy with him and going, okay, the bare minimum, what is one thing that needs to change in order for this to continue? And we both said one thing. It was different for each of us. And neither one of us were willing to budge. And I spent about a day thinking about that, about what he requested and what I requested, and it was like an impasse. Neither one of us were willing to do what the other had asked them to do to make the marriage work. For me, on my end, it felt like a huge violation of myself to do what he was asking you to do, and maybe that was the same for him. But I wasn't willing to lose myself to save the marriage. And at that time, I equated saving the marriage meant losing myself, and I wasn't willing to do that because I'd already given up so much, and it didn't seem like it would be worth losing myself to try and salvage something that didn't seem like it was going to get any better or, you know, be beneficial to anyone. And I looked at the impact our relationship was having on our children. And I looked at, do I want my children to have the relationship I have? And that is a gut-wrenching question to ask. Gut-wrenching. I mean, I would imagine some of you are crying right now, thought of that. No, I did not want them to have that relationship. And yet, your children will model the relationship that you have as adults. You can tell them all day long, I shouldn't have married your dad, or your dad treated me like this, or your mom did this, and whatever. They will observe how to be treated, and they are so moldable, and they pick up on everything, especially if your children are young, like under the ages of 10. Mine are 2 and 5, I think, at the time. They will model what you model for them. And so I did not want my children growing up believing that this is how people treat each other, that this is how a woman is treated in the household, that this is how a marriage works, that this is how a relationship works. I was almost hell-bent to protect my children from witnessing any more of what they had already witnessed because I didn't want that for them. And you can have your religious beliefs. You can have your beliefs about marriage. This is not me trying to change or persuade you. But if you're listening to this episode because you're considering divorce, there's more at stake than just the shame of what may be associated on the other side of a divorce for you if you have children, right? You're creating generational nervous system association with your relationship and your marriage, meaning that your children are internalizing what that home feels like. Even if you try to keep it from them and they don't see you guys actively battling it out, they pick it up in their nervous system. They become hypervigilant. They sense that there's a weird breath that dad makes when mom walks by, or when dad comes home, mom's body starts to get rigid. They can hear the low murmurs or the intensity of the voice behind closed doors. Like your children are picking up on this, right? And so is your home environment one of safety for them, emotional safety and definitely physical safety, right? And that's heavy to consider too. And now all of a sudden we have this moment in time, this crossroads where you've got all of these factors weighing in and you're so confused and you're so lost, and maybe you have somebody to talk to, maybe you have a therapist, maybe you have a friend, you've got family members and friends that are not unbiased. They're totally biased in the advice that they give you because either they don't like your partner and they want you out, or they are worried what's going to happen to you on the other side and if you're going to be able to support yourself or what that's going to do to you. And so they want you to stay and work it out, but I don't think my family knew. I definitely know my family didn't know the extent of what we were experiencing and what I was experiencing until probably 6 months after we separated when I really started, like, pulling the curtains back and being like, "Oh, no, this is what I've been putting up with for years." Um, and so it's hard. That's why I think therapy or coaches that have experience in this stuff, or even if you've gone through trauma, can help you start to navigate your own nervous system. The biggest thing that I think goes wrong in relationships is that you think that you are responsible for your partner's emotional response, or that your partner should change. And while there may be some truth to your experience, you have no control over that. Right? They have to do whatever they're gonna do, and when you recognize that their behavior and their ignoring of you is actually a choice, right? Like, if you're asking for your needs to be met, or you're coming to the table in a logical, rational way and not in an emotional flying off the handle kinda way and going like, "Look, here's what I need from you." Right? As your partner, they should want to do that, right? They should want to make you happy and vice versa. It should be reciprocal. And I think what I hear the most common, especially for women in their 40s and 50s and beyond, is that he just is the way that he is. Like, he won't change, and he's a stick in the mud, and it is what it is. And it is a choice. It is a choice to not honor your request. It is a choice to not do the things that are causing you pain or that are causing you stress and suffering. And yes, maybe you contributed, maybe you didn't listen to him when he asked, so he's being resentful and bitter and like retaliatory. That's childlike behavior, right? That is immature emotional responses to another person, your partner, the person you've chosen to do life with, also a choice, to ignore their requests to try and improve things. And at some point, you got to call a spade a spade. And look, if your religious or value system has you never getting divorced, totally understand that. Totally honor that. If that's the case, cool. Your choice then is to either try to make it work. And if they're unwilling to make it work and you can't divorce or won't divorce, your choice then becomes, well, I'm going to live my best life. And this is just going to be a part of my life that's not going to be great. Right? Like, I'm gonna have somebody who's angry that I sleep next to, but, like, I can still go live my best life, and to hell with them, right? Cool, stay married, do you, but recognize you have choice, right? If you're choosing to stay together because of whatever reason, it just doesn't make sense for you guys to separate. Cool, go live your best life. That can just be one part of your life that's a little bit of a dark Eeyore cloud. The rest of your life can still be fun. And maybe even your partner might just be jealous of the fact that, like, you're having a really great life and want to work on things or join with you in that. And so cool. That would be a good outcome. Alternatively, there is no timeline to divorce. And I think that's part of the overwhelm when you're considering divorce, is you have no idea what it entails. And you've got to go into like research mode to get armed with information, right? And that is when people are considering divorce and they're staying because they're overwhelmed or they're afraid, I say take baby steps. There is no timeline. Right? You don't have to make this decision right now. Go get armed with information, because the more information you get and the more you can let the emotion of what that looks like and the process of it and what the after looks like, which some of you can't predict, but you can get used to the idea of it in small bite-sized chunks. So what that looked like for me is I knew I had to have the conversation first. I didn't need to go to the attorney. I didn't want to go to the attorney. I needed to like address it with him first. So in my situation, that was what the plan was. He was not surprised. This is not the first time we had talked about divorce, in the sense of like it being brought up. This is the first time either one of us said, well, actually, no, it's not. I want a divorce. He had said it one time before. So things clearly hadn't been good. I think he had already moved out of the house, or I don't, it's all a little blurry now, right? He had been in and out of the house just because I kicked him out one time before. Um, So it wasn't high conflict for us when I brought it up. In fact, I think after we had the conversation, we watched a movie. Like, it was just kind of like we had the conversation and then we kind of just let it sit, and we were uncomfortable, and we then spent several weeks. He was still in the house. He slept in a different bedroom at that point, but we were still kind of navigating what happened next. And so I met with an attorney because I was done. And that I knew, and I worked with my therapist on this, but she's like, try a trial separation. I was like, no, I'm in this until I'm not. I didn't want to test anything out. I wanted to know that if the point ever came that I knew it was done, that I would be done and that I would have tried everything and honored my journey in it, that I felt good that if I was going to be done, I was done. And I didn't want to give myself the opportunity of an out until I reached that point, if that point was going to come. And so I was really trying to make everything work until I knew I was done. Like, and that day came, like there was a specific day I knew that's it, we're done. And so for us, it wasn't a high conflict thing. I know for a lot of people, it can be a high conflict thing. So if you're worried about your partner when you have the conversation, having an emotional outburst, this is where you need support. If you're afraid of your physical safety, then that's the problem you solve for first, of being physically safe when you have the conversation. And you may need to talk to an attorney. You may need to talk to friends and family. You're going to have to navigate that. And that's something that I work on with coaching clients privately, if you're worried about that. But your physical safety and your children's physical safety is going to be first and foremost. If you're not worried about your physical safety, but you're worried about emotionally being berated, or their outbursts, then I would do some work on codependency to recognize and be good with yourself, that you are clear in your decision and you can tune out their anger and emotions, even if you have to like disassociate in the moment and like leave your body and just kind of have an out of body experience of this person is emotionally dysregulated. Cool. Um, and not take that on. That can be done in a variety of ways, in a lot of mindfulness techniques, in some breath work, and being able to disconnect what their emotional response is. Because again, it's like a child having a tantrum, and rightfully so. It's a very emotional thing to go through. And especially if you're caught off guard by it. I always find anytime I have to deliver bad news or have a hard conversation, I always set it up with, I have to have a hard conversation with you, or this is going to be a tough conversation. I learned that technique from doctors who have to give bad news to patients, that they almost set it up so that emotionally that person is now like, okay, what are we going on here? As opposed to just like dropping the bomb on them. So that is one suggestion. And then once you have the conversation, have a game plan of what happens next. You don't have to make decisions. It's not like you say it that day and then they move out immediately, although that could happen. There's a lot of financial and logistical stuff that needs to be worked through. And so my next recommendation, either have the conversation first, or you can go meet with an attorney, not to necessarily hire them, but meet with a divorce attorney to understand what the process is and what you need to consider. And it can also be a really great tactic for you to go like, definitely don't want to go that route. We're going to go and try and fix this because that sounds like I don't want to do, because there's so much. I know most women that DM me that they're in this state, they're worried about the financial part of it, right? Like I can't even afford an attorney. I can't, I don't work. I haven't worked in 20 years. And so he has all the income. All of that gets worked out in the divorce process. And so going to meet with an attorney who is licensed in your state to talk about what the divorce process is in your state and how you financially support yourself or get some money from him or the joint funds is part of the divorce process. There are millions of women who get divorced who haven't been working, and there's paths and options and ways to go about that. So that's not a means of not going through with the divorce and to stay in a really unhealthy relationship. But you're going to need to understand the logistics and how that works and talk with an attorney who can guide you in that. There's also finding an attorney that you trust. This was, for me, the only attorneys I met with were women, and I don't remember that being an intentional thing. That was just the divorce attorneys in my area. But there are people who specialize in divorce. They make it the business of divorce. And I will say that that's kind of the icky part, is that there can be some attorneys, especially if you have a high net worth family, that will make it their business of divorce, right? Where they want to keep you arguing and fighting because then they keep getting their monthly retainer, or their retainer keeps growing and there's a lot of money at stake and all this stuff. And so you want to find somebody who you can trust, who gives it to you straight and in a non-emotional kind of way, who can empathize with your experience, right? And not try to gaslight you or, shame you or whatever, but is very direct about the process. Because when that person has to go to battle at court, you're going to be emotional. There is no getting around it. You are breaking up a family, right? You're breaking up with somebody that you promised life with, and there are high emotions. And then there's, sometimes there's vindictive behavior, and all of that emotion kind of fiddles out over time. But having an attorney who can start to help you make those decisions from a logical, rational, strategic way as opposed to the emotional way is going to be super helpful for you. Because the way that I started to approach divorce, and my divorce took about a year, um, was, you send off, if you're the one filing, you send off the paperwork to be served to your husband or wife, and then their attorney will respond whether they agree with it or they have changes they want to be made. So there's a lot of back and forth, but there can be weeks in between that. Attorneys are not fast people, court systems are not fast. Okay. So it's like you send it off and then you wait. And so there's not a whole lot of decision making to be made in between other than you guys kind of live together if you can't afford to get out of the house. This is not when you go start dating around and you don't start like getting your emotions met elsewhere. I don't recommend it because that can complicate the divorce process. And a lot of people want to move on, or they, have somebody that's treating them nicely and all of a sudden they start getting feelings for them. They're like, well, I'm kind of free, but that can complicate the divorce process. But again, when you have an attorney guiding you through this, they walk you through all that. So all of that to say is like, I totally understand all of the factors at play when your relationship just can't move forward in the way it is. And where do you go from there? So, to oversimplify a very complex relational situation, you've got to decide what you want. And that sometimes can be the hardest part. Like, in your body that this can't move forward in this way, but is there a way it can move forward? Are you fully done, or are you just like exhausted of now and you can't visualize how it can be done, but you don't necessarily want it to end? Or are you done? You know that there is no moving forward. All of that you need to get clear on first because it is a big decision and it's not something to be thrown around lightly, in my opinion. I know there are people who use it as almost like a manipulation tactic. That's abusive, right? That's traumatic. Don't recommend that at all. So if you are struggling to actually have clarity on how you want to move forward, the tool that helped me in this process was somatic release breathwork, doing a big long breathwork session, hour session, to get the fear out, to get the anxiety, the stress around it out, and to have clarity on what it is I wanted after I got all of that out. Okay. I can do breathwork sessions with you if you want to do it one-on-one. We do this inside the Self-Aware Army. That's my healing community. We do live group virtual breathwork sessions every other week. There's always a replay available. To me, breathwork was what got me through divorce. It's what helped me to really, again, clear out that repressed emotion so I can actually understand what I want. Is this something I need to solve for right now? No. Is this, am I really afraid of this? Okay, is this a threat now, or am I just perceiving what could be? If I am stressed and anxious, like anger, there was a lot of anger that came up that I didn't realize I had. I worked through the anger safely in a safe container through breath work. And then I felt peaceful and calm afterwards to be able to handle whatever decisions were coming up that I needed to make or whatever, conflicts were happening. I could handle them in a rational, logical, responsible adult kind of way rather than the emotional reactive side of things that stress and emotions can create. So if you're interested in learning more about breathwork, hit me up in the DM. You can schedule a one-on-one breathwork session with me, or you can join the Self-Aware Army. We keep that program super affordable because I want to make sure as many people have access to it as possible. So right now we have it at $19 a month. If you're listening to this later on in the year, it's probably a little bit more because we're starting off very low to get as many people in as we can. And it is a beautiful, beautiful tool to help you on your healing journey, whether you decide to stay or go, but it will help you get clear and connect back to you. So my heart goes out to you if you're in that position where you're considering divorce. I know that feeling. And if I can offer you any hope on the other side, you will be okay. You will. Whether you stay or go, you will be okay because your default is okay. Maybe you're not great. Maybe you're not horrible. You're just okay. We tend to always go back to just being okay. So regardless of the decision you make and whatever time frame you want to make it in, just know you're going to be okay. Right. And so now it comes down to playing the game of what is it that you want? You are worthy and deserving of having everything that you want. And if that's not this current partner, fine. So be it. I know I met my ex at 23, 24. The hell did I know about life back then, right? That was a 20-year-old making a lifelong decision. And yet I wouldn't take it back for a minute. I've never regretted my marriage. I've never regretted my divorce. So take that for what it is. But I'm here to hold space for you. I'm here to help you through it if you need support, just a listening ear. It's not something easy to go through, but it's also not something to avoid just because it's unknown. right? If that's really the decision you need to make. So that's all I've got for today. If you are struggling with or contemplating divorce, let me know. Love to share and love to speak into your life in whatever way would support you best and help you get clarity on what you want. And whether that's a divorce or not, that's totally your call. But I can help ask some questions that you may not be asking yourself and maybe give you some insight on what the process is like, because I know it can be scary. So until next time, have a good one. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of Unblock Your BS podcast. I hope you found this conversation as powerful and inspiring as I did. Before we wrap up, I want to extend an invitation to you. Yes, you. If you have a story to share about your own healing journey, insights on self-awareness or healing, or if you're navigating the path of personal growth and would love to explore it further, I'd love to have you as a guest on one of the future episodes. This space is all about having real, meaningful, and honest conversations, whether it's diving into a breakthrough you've had, exploring a topic that's close to your heart, or even joining me for live coaching. It's all about unblocking the belief systems and stories that might be holding you back and finding ways to fully step into your most authentic self. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, reach out to me. You can head on over to unblockyourbs.com/podcast. I'll link that up in the show notes if you want to apply to be on the show, if you want to join me for some live coaching because you really need the support and the insight. And then, hey, don't forget to share this episode with someone who might need it. Leave a review if you're loving the podcast. Tell me your favorite parts. Tell me what you want to hear. And until next time, keep unblocking your BS and creating the life you deserve. Have a good one.